Hello, everyone. Week, we're going to talk about CVs and how to make your CV look really professional and pretty. So recently, the casework team here at NUM has received a lot of requests to for support about CVs and applications in the vanilla world. So obviously there are tons of ways to get a job, like a non-sex working job. There is getting paid for activism, so like career activism, stuff like that. There is the whole academic world. There's also a way of like opening your own business and selling like things that you've done yourself. Like there's many ways. Today we are only going to focus about CVs. We're going to have a look at references and also about skills that many sex workers have got in their job in the sex industry, and like how to phrase them and how to use them in like non-sex working jobs. And we're also going to have a few, like a quick look into criminal records. Let's start.
Yes, so one of the first problems that sex workers trying to find a vanilla job or a side hustle might face is they have gaps in the CVs. And some of these gaps will be small and some of them will be larger. That all depends on your situation. And for some people who have had a side hustle now and again, there might be a gap and then a job and then another gap and then another job. And it might be difficult to hide them. And you might be wondering how to conceal them or cover them up or explain them. So there are a few things to do that. The thing is, while you had a gap in your civilian world, you have been doing plenty of things in the world of sex work, and you have been gaining new skills and you have been producing stuff. All this is still work experience. You just need to find a way to rephrase it. And there are multiple ways of explaining a gap in your application and in your CV so that it becomes not a hindrance, but rather something that actually helps you get the job. We are trying to say that it's not going to be a one CV fits all, but rather you will have to produce multiple CVs for each individual job application, for each individual position that you want to apply to, because the skills that you have gained in your years of sex work will be very varied, and sometimes you might have to tweak things a little to actually explain how you gain those skills. But also because of the variety of skills that you will have through sex work, you don't have to display them all. You just have to show the ones that are relevant to the position that you're applying for. And your explanation for the gap should also be relevant to the position that you're applying for. So let's look at the gaps first. To begin with, if it's a small gap, and if it's a gap of 6 months or fewer, you don't even need to explain that unless they ask you during the interview. And the simple explanation is you were job searching. It is also a very popular advice on very many forums to use years only instead of months and years when listing your employment history. It is so popular, however, that it might be something that employers are actually aware of. So if this way you're trying to cover a gap of like 20 months, and it might come out if the employers start contacting your references, then you might actually consider some of other things that you can put into that gap instead of just putting years instead of months and years. So first of all, if it is a gap of like 10, 11 months or something like that, you could very easily use functional or combination CV formats instead of using the chronological CV format. And in that way, the gap will not actually be obvious. And even if you use months and years for the start and end of each of your positions, because it is not a chronological format, the employer will have to look really closely into every single date to notice that there was a gap of more than 6 months. Another thing you might consider to cover small gaps is things like unpaid internship with an organization where a friend of yours or a colleague or a client works who could actually give you reference for that internship. You could use your actual self-employment in sex work, but maybe don't mention sex work to cover bigger gaps in your CV. If you are struggling with what sort of business you want to say you have been running, there are ideas to go around it. And finally, please remember that it is absolutely normal to omit a job or two, especially if right now you are 45 and you have had 20 years of employment. It is absolutely fine to omit a job that you did at, I don't know, at Starbucks when you were 19. Were there Starbucks 20 years ago? I don't know. It doesn't matter. What I'm trying to say is that small jobs that you did when you just finished the university or while you were still at the university or straight out of school are not really that important 20 years on. So it's absolutely fine to omit them and then put in the cover letter something on the lines of, I have omitted a couple of irrelevant to the current position jobs in my CV, and that actually might explain a small gap in your CV, especially if it's not the one that you're covering, that is right now. Bigger gaps and how to explain them, especially if this is the first civilian job that you're applying for after the gap. There are plenty of ways of doing that. If you have actually been studying, then it's not even a gap. You have been in employment, you just weren't exactly paid for it. I mean, studying is a full-time job. You may have been freelancing. Obviously, your self-employment, as we said, if depending if you have had a business registered and if you can actually produce some paperwork to show that. Other thing to explain a gap would be full-time parenting, or if you're not a parent, homemaking. You could be working in other countries, preferably other countries where they don't speak English so that it's difficult for you to produce references. You may have been busy in activism, whether that was Labour Party that you were very deeply involved with, or you have been developing some eco-friendly solutions for, whatever you've done, whatever else other than sex work you have done or have been interested in the years that you have been doing sex work. All of these skills, all that knowledge and all these efforts could actually be used towards explaining the gap in your CV and making it look like you haven't been sitting around on your sofa all day long, but rather you have been busy. You have been volunteering at a number of organizations who can also produce CVs if you have been doing that. If you haven't, but you are thinking of getting a civilian job or a side hustle later on in life, maybe start volunteering for some relevant organizations right now. So these are just some of the ideas. Keep it in mind with traveling, it is possible to frame traveling, if you decided to take a gap year and go travel around the world, it is very easy to frame it as gaining new skills, various new skills. But keep it in mind that UK is a multinational place, and if you haven't spent that much time in a country, but then tell that you have traveled there to your future employer, who may or may not be from that country, think things through. Don't just lie. Be honest, just very creatively honest. And depending on what sort of position you're applying, or the other way around, depending on what cover story is easier or comes more naturally to you, you can choose certain organizations that will see your cover story and your experience as useful and worthwhile. For example, if your cover story is full-time parenting or care for a sick relative, then you could look up local organizations that work on promoting women's rights. And employers in that organization will hopefully be more sympathetic to somebody who is just coming out of full-time parenting. And more women than men traditionally have to take responsibility for their sick relatives and responsibility for their children. So this is going to be something that will hopefully be more of a plus. Other things you could consider is look up local organizations that are known for their inclusivity. And sometimes these are not even local, but national organizations. And obviously that would only work if you belong to a specific minority. Maybe you are a person of color, maybe you are very openly gay, there might be something, maybe you're a trans person. So all these things might actually work in your favor. Just see what sort of organizations are really trending in your area. If you're really struggling with references, or the gap is very difficult or is too long for you to explain, then consider looking for organizations that have limited hiring resources. These organizations will likely not have the time and the capacity to contact your references to speak to them about your professionalism and your skills. Companies like that are usually very small organizations or startups, as well as smaller charities. Charities can actually outsource their HR and have somebody else outside the organization do that, which might be something that will help you get the job even if you don't have the references. Now, the thing that we also can't recommend enough is temp agencies. A lot of them will look for references, but a lot of them are very accepting of people coming back to the labor market after a gap for whatever reason, whether that was health, whether that was parenting, whether that was traveling or studying. Temp agencies are also really helpful in gaining a lot of different skills in a relatively short period of time, because you will likely be working at different organizations, which, by the way, if you haven't thought of it before, allows you to put yet another skill on your CV. First of all, to be starting a new job at a new organization once a week, or however often you're sent to a new assignment through a temp agency, means that you have to have really good communication skills, and you have to be really flexible and really adaptable to the environment around you, which changes so often. So these are the skills that you really want to be highlighting on your CV. We don't normally think of them as skills as sex workers, because this is just something that we perform on a daily basis. But you really need to be mindful of every little thing you're doing on a daily basis, because somewhere out there in the civilian world, this is a highly rated skill. And finally, most of these things will only work if your face is not all over the internet attached to your naked body. If you are a well-known porn performer, or even a less-known porn performer for that reason, and if you have been showing your face in your ads, even if you are not a porn performer, this makes you slightly more vulnerable to being outed, even if you don't mention sex work in your CV. The same obviously goes for people who have been outed, and I'm talking on a bigger scale, like in local newspapers, not like to members of your family. Both are equally traumatic, but being outed on a bigger scale means that if your employer Googles your name, there it is, all your past history, and all your CV gap explanations kind of go out of the window. In these cases, you might have a word with the local sex worker community and see if there are some organizations that they recommend, because there very likely are many organizations throughout the UK that are very accepting of sex workers as their employees. The thing is that this is not a sort of thing that they would put on their website. So unless somebody has already worked for them and can vouch for them, you likely won't ever find out about it unless you ask. Other things that sex workers have done in the past is sex workers who have been out as sex workers is working in sex shops, or maybe trying jobs in bars with a sex angle. There are numerous civilian jobs where having sexuality in some way attached to it is actually beneficial.
Other things to be aware of are topics like preparing your cover letter. I mean, when it comes to covering gaps in your CV, there's a lot that you can do. You can go down approaches that my colleague has raised, such as maybe trying to be honest about the situations, or trying to make sure you're highlighting skills that you've acquired from them. But it's really important to make sure from your very first impression with an employer, you're going in on strong feet. And this is where things like your cover letter really make the first impression. It's really where you make your mark. It wants to be simple. It wants to be straightforward. It isn't where you duplicate everything that you're sort of demonstrating on your CV. It's more of this is a little bit about me. Thank you for your time, and you're covering a lot of what is put out on the brief of the job. So you want to make sure you're really spending attention at what the job description is saying. So you're looking at that and being aware that whoever is hiring this role is probably looking to reduce their risk of like potentially an employee that won't fit the mark. So they're looking to talk to their supervisors if they have one and say, the reason why I've chosen this person is they hit all of these topics which we've written in our job description as being relevant to this role. So think of it that way, and think of making sure that you're answering those questions if you are in that mindset, and making sure that the skills and maybe the personal passions that you have, they can still be in there, but they're not taking a priority or getting in the way of someone who is quickly looking for those particular skills that they've put out, those skills or other relevant bits of information which they've put out in their job description. When it comes to talking about past experiences, you really want to also look at how you can emphasize the what you've picked up during past experiences. So if you're writing down about a past bit of work, or a past maybe you were traveling, or maybe you were doing some volunteering, when you're writing about that, try and pull out things in that experience where you can talk about the skills which, again, the job description said they were looking for. So are they looking for good communication skills? Maybe your volunteer work was your group organizing and you had to be aware of group dynamics. Maybe that's something that actually you were just doing amongst your sex work, and you're able to actually say, during this time, I had to manage many people within many tight time frames, and I had to be conscious of how they were feeling across this time. So you're able to try and pull out amongst these experiences examples of why you're a great fit for the role that they're looking for. That's one of the sort of approaches which also lends itself quite well to the functional layout of the of your CV. So you had the sort of chronology, that's making sure that you're just saying what jobs went in which order as far as when they happened. But functionality is making sure that you're focusing on what you are doing and being able to say, I'm a good person for this role because I've done this and that. That kind of helps a little bit being able to pull out some of those answers. Something which is really good to be aware of is also being aware of power words. So you don't want to use words in your CV that sound like they're just sort of pushed, they're just sort of corporate language that people just use on CV. It's used over and over again. Some words become kind of meaningless because of the fact that people use it so often. So sometimes people will say like maybe some words like intuitive and innovate. Like I have innovative approaches, and sometimes they're really great words, but they get used to the point where, without putting a context next to it, it can just sound like waffle. So you really want to make sure your CV doesn't have too much of that. You're able to say in your description of what you've been doing, you're starting off with a powerful word and you're saying something like, well, if we take the example of the communication, maybe your sentence starts off with communicating difficult issues to amongst different staff members, or amongst different members of a committee, or whatever you're going to phrase it as. You're starting it with like an action, something you're resolving. So it's not just learning, it's not just acquiring skills, it's actually demonstrating them. You're starting with something like that because you have to be aware someone who's looking at CVs is going to look through quite a lot of them, and they get quite a quick picture of your CV by the first sort of words that are in the sentences on your CV. So you're trying to get a flavor of who you are, and it needs to be dynamic, and it needs to be these words that aren't like, I did this then, I did this then, I did this with this organization then, repeating itself over and over again, because actually that's what will strike the person who is looking at your CV. You want it to be full of varied skills that you're hoping that will answer what they're looking for when they're looking at their job description. So that's kind of what you're hoping to do with that. Remember, if you focus too heavily on filling the gaps, then you might actually end up drawing attention to these gaps. It's actually probably better to continually think of the fact that they've written their CV and they are making sure, again, as I said before, they're reducing risks. They're reducing risks of not wasting time with people that they would want to bring in for interview to talk to. They're looking to make sure that they are they're sort of looking for a certain combination. The way I like to think of it is a bit like when you're seeing a client. You could spend ages talking about yourself and they might get quite bored. Ultimately, sometimes you just want, the client will end up talking about themselves, and the client's really happy doing that, and then they leave a happy person and you've done a great job. Like, some of that actually works in the CV space. They're saying in the description of the job description, we're looking for someone like this and this and this. And in your CV, you cater what you're sending to them and saying not the same words exactly, but you're demonstrating, I'm one of this, 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 and making it match in the same way. You're telling them what they want to hear, so that they're like, okay, well, at this point, we should get them in, have an interview, or however your job hiring process works, to get to know a bit more about you then. A CV is never going to encapsulate the entire value of you as a person, and don't really expect it to. It's going to be too much for you to treat it like a personal history. Realize that you can capture some of that with how you present certain things and maybe how you try and bring in other conversations later, but more of that comes in through your interview and how they get to know you as time goes on, when it comes to maybe trying you out for a certain duration at the beginning of you getting the job. So make sure you're really getting the first things that they're wanting to get in the job description. Make sure that's really clear and easy for them in your CV. If it's too crowded, then they won't be seeing it quickly. So straightforward and easy for them to process. There's a load of skills that you've probably picked up through sex work and you won't even be aware. However, there's a bunch of them on the screen right now. I won't go through each one of them, but do be aware of again, think of the interpersonal skills, how you're sort of evaluating how someone is feeling and assessing risk, the continual amount of time that you're with them. Also think about the sort of logistics of, okay, well, if I'm taking a booking then, how much time will I need beforehand? Is it going to impact this way? Also think about the security that you're consistently using throughout your sort of management as a sex worker. I mean, obviously there's very different skills on different parts of sex work, but you also need to be aware some of these skills will also use a lot of valuable space on your CV. So if you are, for example, going for a job in something like graphic design, actually a bunch of these skills may be just taking up valuable space. The sort of proficiencies, that's sometimes what they call the skills section, that actually like a graphic designer will be looking for, is they'll be wanting to know what type of software are you competent at? Are you good at using a Mac as well as a Windows system? And it's fine if you're not, but it's explaining these sorts of things. So you want to make sure you're getting those down there, and be aware that sometimes these creative jobs also rely more on your portfolio. So a basic CV is really saying you're able to do, the sort of time management stuff and showing evidence that people have trusted and worked with you. But actually a lot of it's down to the software that you're able to do, paired with examples of the type of creative work that you've done in the past.
All right, let's have a quick look at criminal records. So obviously a lot of sex workers have a criminal record, because while sex work itself is legal, a lot of the things that we do to find clients isn't. So first of all, you do not have to state your criminal record in your application if you are not asked. So don't write it into your cover letter, don't write it into your CV. You don't have to disclose until you are asked. However, if you are asked, if your employer asks you if you have a criminal record, not disclosing is gross misconduct. So you can get into, you can not only lose the job, but you can get into some more problems if you don't disclose your criminal record. So just don't lie about it. However, there is the Rehabilitation of Offences Act, which gives you a legal right not to disclose after a certain time. So convictions are called spent after a while. It depends obviously on the conviction and like how serious it is. If you have been to prison for 4 years or more, a conviction is never spent, but most other convictions will only have to be disclosed for between 1 and 7 years, depending on how long, some longer. That really depends. So cautions, for example, are spent immediately. You don't ever have to disclose them. It really, again, like have a look at the organization Unlock. They have a lot of information online on specific offences, so you can look up exactly how long your criminal record has to be disclosed. This, for a lot of sex workers, this does get a lot more complicated because a lot of us have repeat or multiple convictions. Now, the years of those offences being spent will obviously pile up. Some of them will cancel each other out, but it really depends. So if you just want to know how long you have to disclose your convictions for, there is a disclosure calculator online. It's literally disclosurecalculator.org.uk. We'll also put it into the description box. So there you can just enter all of your convictions, and that will give you an estimate of how long you will have to disclose them for. But it is something to keep in mind that it just gets a bit more complicated as soon as you have more than one. It also really depends on who you're applying to. So some employers won't ask at all, and again, you don't have to disclose if you're not being asked. But some, especially if you are working with children or with vulnerable adults, so a lot of caring jobs, a lot of support workers, like any residential setting, stuff like that, they will ask for a criminal record check, either standard or advanced, or also DBS check, so disclosure and bearing service. And there you also have to disclose spent convictions. So some things that will be on your record just have to be disclosed for certain jobs. Usually your employer should let you know beforehand if you need to provide a DBS check or criminal record check. There has also been a court case in 2018 where a bunch of women who previously were involved in the sex trade got to remove multiple offences from their record for good. They succeeded, so they had their prostitution-related offences removed from their record completely, so it also doesn't show up in a DBS or criminal record check. And if you do have multiple convictions, if you do have prostitution-related offences, you can apply for your convictions to be removed. For that, just get in contact with your lawyer if you have one. Also get in touch with the ECP or your union. Unlock, the organisation that I've just mentioned, also can give support with that. Or contact the NUM casework team so we can signpost you to an organisation that can help you apply for getting these convictions removed. There is no guarantee, but there is, depending on what it is and how many they are, and all of that stuff, there is a chance that you can get them removed for good. It also kind of depends on where in the UK you are. So Scotland will have potentially a bit different rehabilitation times than England and Wales do. So also just kind of look into that and keep that in mind. Again, Unlock is a project that supports people with a criminal record in the UK. They have a lot of really informative online information. They also have the calculator that I mentioned, and information and a helpline where they can specifically help you, because of course this is a very individual process, and depending on how many and which convictions you have, the situation looks a bit different. And they also have just a forum of people who have got jobs or are looking for jobs who have convictions. Thank you. Another thing that we wanted to have a quick look at are references. So usually if you apply for a job, you will be asked to provide references from previous employers. However, if you don't have any, or if you don't have any recent employers, there are a few other sources where you can get references from. So this strongly depends on the story that you are telling in your application beforehand. So depending on what you're focusing on, as my colleagues have mentioned, in the cover letter and also in your CV, depending on that, make sure that you can just back that with a reference. So there are some organizations that you volunteered for. That doesn't necessarily have to be formal volunteering or anything where you've had like a position or something, but also if you have volunteered or like just helped out with an organization in your area, or also nationally, maybe they can give you a reference. Maybe depending on what organization it is, give them a nudge to not out you by accident, because especially if it is a sex work support project, it is possible that if like they talk about peer support or something like that, that they will accidentally out you to your new employer, which potentially you don't want to happen. You can also get just anyone else in your life, like teachers, professors. If you are part of a place of worship, if you're part of a religion, there might be somebody who can give you a reference about what you've been doing or how you've been acting or something like that. Former colleagues or collaborators. With collaborators, especially if you are talking about self-employment in your application in your CV, previous self-employment, do think about giving former colleagues or collaborators, or also companies that you've traded with, as references for your self-employed work. Also, if you have clients that you trust enough to do so, clients can also give you a reference that they have traded with you before. Again, if you trust them, then they can talk about an interaction that you had that isn't necessarily sex work. Like also that can be phrased very vaguely. Again, make sure that you that it fits to your story, that it fits to your whole application, and that you choose your references depending on where you're applying for and what your story in your cover letter is. Another kind of helpful thing, hopefully, is to not list your references up front. Don't hand it in with your application, but put the nice little sentence that we titled this slide with, references available upon request, because a lot of employers won't even ask for them, or they will only ask for them after your interview. So only if you are about to get the job, basically, just to make sure. Of course, have references in case they ask, but don't put them up on put them on the paper up front.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Currently, we've still got some £25 vouchers for people that need. So if you're needing a bit of help during what's going on at the moment, the COVID and the crisis, then do consider calling one of our caseworkers. And if you need caseworkers for other reasons, there's information on the screen at the moment. They're really supportive and have dealt with almost every situation before. So it's someone who's there who can help if needed. We've also got an online chat, which is available in Times Online there. Thank you very much for joining us today, and hopefully see you soon.
And if I could quickly mention something, NAM is going to be closing on the 24th of December. So if you think you will need a voucher during the period, over the Christmas and the New Year, get in touch with the casework team now, and they will send you the voucher in advance. But between the 24th of December and the 4th of January, NAM casework team will be unavailable to help you. So if you need to make any arrangements for that period, do that all in advance.
Thank you.